You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived. I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you.
Herbie Hind and Ben Dover were an average heterosexual couple. Both born in sunny Bootjack, California, they met through Christian Mingle and dated for 5 years.
They were always so happy together. He treated her so well. She never complained about him. And we really did see him as our own right from the beginning.
Unfortunately, things weren't all what they seemed. This was a tragic love story at its finest. In this episode of Forensic Files, we uncover how a nasty breakup led to a nasty turn of events. Herbie Hind and Ben Dover met in their hometown of Bootjack, California when they were both in their freshman year of college. Engaged during their junior year, the couple planned to move up north to Sacramento in hopes of starting a future together. But something changed.
She was a very good friend of mine. So I came from the Philippines in senior year, and she became my friend really fast because she was also Filipino, and then we speak our language, yeah. And then she told me she picked up a job at the sports bar in the town next over, Meroposa, I believe. So she told me about her boyfriend Ben, and how they were having financial problems, and they were trying to move out to Sacramento, I believe. And she quit their job at the local church, because we love Jesus. And we went to the bar afterwards. That's where she works now. I get free drinks, huh? Anyways, I miss her. R.I.P. Anak. May God be with you always. God is good. Thank you.
Of course he was furious. Quitting the church to go work at a sports bar, he was the definition of a fundamentalist. They'd come home and argue all night, but it was also because he thought she was cheating. And this only began when Herbie started to pick up later shifts. She told me that those later shifts were for them to afford to move to start their new life, but Ben didn't understand. I'd hear them through the walls, and he'd be reciting the Bible over her. He'd often accuse her of cheating, saying that it was an excuse to cover her late night affairs. The first instant he got violent, she ended it.
Following their breakup, Herbie would receive random reoccurring love notes from Ben trying to win her back. She'd also see him around the corner, only to look back and not see him again. Fearing for her safety, she filed for a restraining order, but after that, things took a dark turn.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hey Mom, I know it's late, but please call me back as soon as possible. I filed a restraining order against Ben 2 days ago and it's not working. For some reason, he still doesn't understand what the message is. I'm being followed and I don't know what to do. I can't handle it anymore. I want to...
On April 3rd, 2017, Herbie Hind was found by her mother in the kitchen dead on the floor. She laid between the fridge and the counter with a blood-covered gun loosely in her right hand, her head in a pool of her own blood. On the fridge, a piece of tape with a strand of blonde hair stuck a note on its surface. The note read,
Dear friends and family, I regret to inform you that I have decided to resign from the endless job that is my life. Life without Ben has been hard, and I've just realized the turmoil I've caused for him. Furthermore, I regret staying away from the path of God. As Jesus died for our sins, I will die for mine. I sincerely apologize for not giving y'all 2 weeks notice. Peace, suckers. See you on the other side. Herbie out.
Investigators questioned anyone she knew, specifically anyone who contacted her 48 hours before her death, and anyone who was close to her, such as past partners. Ben Dover was the first to be questioned the day after they discovered her body. One question, Ben claimed that he was never there, but out for a drink in Mariposa with his friend Micah Jason. Micah was then questioned to confirm Ben's alibi, and at this point of the investigation, they both seemed to check out. But a neighbor who was up working that night described herself seeing 2 young adult men walk out of the sliding doors about 20 minutes after she heard a gunshot coming from Herbie's home next to hers.
It was a really loud bang. It was probably around 11:30 that I looked out of my office window and I saw a young man walk out into Herbie's driveway. They went back inside the house. It was about 20 or so minutes and they just walked out. He was wearing a dark hoodie and the hood was on his head, but I can see that it kind of looked like Ben.
At the crime scene, forensic analysts found a strand of blonde hair attached to the tape that held the note on the fridge. The strand was carefully removed from the tape with forceps and placed into a paper bindle, then put into a larger envelope for security. All openings were sealed and were initialed and dated at the overlap. The evidence was then labeled and the chain of custody was then filled to allow investigators to track the evidence down person by person. This helps investigators prevent any tampering and or loss of evidence crucial to the case. Investigators were also able to swipe off latent fingerprints on the sliding door from the kitchen where the assailants made their escape. Once collected, the evidence was sent to processing, but the work wasn't done yet.
Because we couldn't have something to compare the strand of hair to, we couldn't use it to pinpoint to any individual suspect. It's class evidence, meaning that even if we did test it, it would only narrow the strand down to a general classification of hair. We need more than a strand of hair to narrow it down to a single person.
So right away we can tell that Herbie's hair is brunette, and so are her roommates, mothers, and neighbors. So the only person or the only people that are blonde that were in that proximity during that time, according to the neighbor, are Micah and Ben. So this is enough to speculate them as suspects.
Although the strand of hair wasn't enough to point investigators to a suspect, it was enough to speculate that Herbie's suicide was not a suicide and that someone else had been there at the time Herbie took her last breath. It was also enough for investigators to speculate that that same person wrote the note as well due to the blonde strand of hair attached to the piece of tape. While at the crime scene, detectives found Hines' dog locked in the cage in the backyard. After the dog was released, detectives later noticed something attached at her paw. Between her nails was a small piece of black fabric appearing to be from a piece of clothing. It was removed with forceps and placed safely into a paper bindle, which was then placed into a manila envelope. All openings were sealed and the evidence tag was filled out by the collector, as well as its chain of custody. The overlaps were then signed, dated, and initialed.
Thanks to Herbie's dog, we did not only receive a single fiber, but we actually were provided with a whole piece of fabric, and that made it immensely easier for us to narrow down our results. During testing, we pulled one fiber from the fabric and put it under a microscope for further analyzation. You can see here that the fiber is a natural fiber, probably from cotton or linen. You can see its uneven edges, inconsistent pigmentation, and most distinctly, the absence of a medulla.
After testing, the sample was concluded to be a fabric of natural fibers, most specifically cotton. When investigators were searching through Herbie's home, they noticed that her various clothing items and textiles happened to be some form of synthetic or recycled material, so it was likely that they had no connection to the case. However, investigators did explore the possibility that someone could have broken in.
After spotting the fingerprints, we all knew that something was fishy. Because the sliding doors are made of glass, you can kind of see the prints as is, especially in the daytime. Using a type of black powder and a piece of Scotch packaging tape, we were able to lift the fingerprints found on their sliding doors. We could see that the culprit had a good mix of both radio and owner loops. We then took a look at the minutiae, and you can see some of their particular characteristics in their fingerprints, like these verifications and spurs.
Strangely enough, both Micah and Ben were arrested 8 years earlier for armed robbery, and based on the 10 card collected from both of them, they both had one scar coming from the bottom right on their left hand palm prints. After, investigators also searched around the house for any other handwritten notes to use as an exemplar for Herbie's alleged suicide note. What they found were the love notes from Ben in the trash, some of Herbie's old school assignments, Herbie's roommate's grocery lists, and signatures from ripped-up checks. The suicide note was also ripped from the side, which could mean it was ripped from a certain notebook or journal of some sort.
We took a look at certain characteristics like embellishments, word and line spacing, and diacritics, which are locations in which we cross our T's and dot our I's. If we compare the suicide note to the given exemplars, you can see that some of the culprit's handwriting characteristics pop up, even if they did try and hide it.
When Ben and Micah were taken in for further questioning 3 days after the first session, Ben and Micah arrived wearing the exact same clothes as they were when they were first questioned. The investigator, though thinking it was a bit odd, continued on with their interviews up until they spotted what appeared to be a dried blood stain on the hem of Micah's hooded jacket during his separate interview. Micah, however, claimed it was Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, but because Micah was acting suspicious, the interviewers continued to question him. However, Micah stayed solid on his alibi, and the interviewers had no choice but to release him. At Herbie's autopsy, medical examiners found that the bullet wound was the result of a bullet from a Glock G29. The gun found in Herbie's hand was a Muger MK3. The bullet wound did not match with what the gun in Herbie's hand would have given her, which further supported the assumption that Herbie's supposed suicide was staged. Furthermore, when the gun was being collected from Herbie's hand, investigators found that the gun had been placed. There was no void. After receiving this information, Ben Dover and Micah Jason were summoned back in for further questioning. Ben Dover failed to show, but was later caught trying to cross the border to Nevada heading to Las Vegas. Police searched his car and found a notepad with papers resembling the suicide note. Close analyzation showed that the notepad had indents and where the suicide note was written. Analysts decided to test it further by using a piece of paper and a crayon. And sure enough, it was the same notepad. To see if the stain on Micah's jacket was blood, analysts decided to perform a presumptive blood test to see if the stain has any trace of biological components that signify that it is human blood. If tested positive, analysts continue on to a confirmatory test that confirms whether or not the sample is indeed human blood.
Using the Kastle-Meyer method, we were able to rehydrate the stain first by moistening a cotton swab with water, then applying the swab to the dried stain, eventually picking up the rehydrated blood. Basically what this is a chemical reaction. We add the special phenolphthalein solution, also known as the Kastle-Meyer solution, which, if in contact with blood, should turn pink due to its chemical reaction with the iron in the blood.
To collect the sample, we used a cotton swab to pick up some of Herbie's blood. Afterwards, we sealed it into a vial, signed and dated it on the overlap, and placed it into a manila envelope, where we also signed and dated on the overlap.
Using the blood samples collected from the blood at the crime scene, analysts were able to match the blood of that to the stain on Micah's jacket, proving that the two stains were a match to Herbie's blood.
To make sure that they were a complete match, we did a blood typing test, in which we used different serums based on the proteins found on the surface of our blood cells. After the test was performed, the stain was proven to be O positive, and Herbie's blood from the crime scene was also tested O positive.
Back at the California state border, Bootjack City police were able to detain Ben as they waited for the results from the crayon test. After the crayon test results were delivered via phone call, he was arrested. As Ben was getting cuffed, Micah confessed to the full sequence of the crime back at the Bootjack City Police Department in order to receive a lighter sentence, and Ben was officially arrested after another phone call was made to inform the officers on the scene about Micah's confession. On May 2, 2017, Ben Dover pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years in prison for being an accessory to murder, and Micah also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 years for involuntary manslaughter. After weeks of trying to win Herbie Hind back, Ben Dover received a restraining order from who he believed was the love of his life. Furious, he called his best friend, Micah Jason, and together they planned to scare Herbie Hind once and for all, in order to win her back. On the night of Herbie's murder, Dover grabbed a Muger MK3 and Jason grabbed his father's Glock G29. Their plan was to scare Herbie into thinking they were going to kill her, and as a bonus, force her to give her inheritance money from her father's death, which occurred only 5 days ago. When they left for her house, both guns were supposed to be unloaded, and Ben's was. Micah's, however, wasn't, and he didn't even know. At 11:16 p.m., Ben and Micah drove up to Herbie's house and quietly went inside. After 5 years of dating, Ben knew that the back door was always unlocked until Herbie's roommate came home. While Micah went to resituate Herbie's body, Ben went out to grab one of his school notebooks to write the suicide note. Rushing out and quickly making it back in, he was in such a rush that he failed to make an effort in disguising his handwriting. Nevertheless, he was quick to write Herbie's staged suicide note, and once he finished, he ripped the note from the notebook, placed it on the fridge, and left swiftly with Micah. After his arrest, Ben Dover later revealed that he was balding, which would explain the strand of hair on the piece of tape that stuck the forged suicide note on the fridge. Overall, Herbie's death was the result of a horrific accident due to an act of pure stupidity. This was a tragic love story at its finest. Bootjack, California was never the same, and since Herbie's death, the town has grown even quieter than before.
She got it.
Whitey, shut up!
Okay? Okay ka na okay if you have to practice.
I know!
I don't think
I'm
so.
trying to do my finals here, Lola.
But,
Just girl things. Just girl things.
And so pero
Phenolphthalein.
Phenolphthalein.
No, that doesn't sound right. Okay.
Of course he was furious.
Phenolphthalein.
I was right.
Phenolphthalein. Okay. Phenolphthalein.
Okay.
If there's no one there, you don't.
Hey guys, what's up? I just want to say
Big shout out to Jarrett right here.
because he gave us a piece of his sock. Say hi, Jared. He beat our bloopers.
We're so good. We're gonna get it done. Look at us now. Struggling.